Hi guys, welcome to your second online session. Today we are talking about our second formative component. In this case, for English, that work level 12, 3, 4, 3, 6, 7, 5, 4. There, uh, I'm sorry, the first formative component is the one that we are talking. So the first formative component, if I had tried this before, I wouldn't have created. I'm going to share the screen so we can see what is the formative component that I'm talking about. So if I had tried this before, I wouldn't have produced it in mass. Si hubiese probado esto antes, no lo había producido en mass. Now, we saw the last week past simple versus past perfect, the third conditional, and the modal verbs. Today we are seeing relative clauses, pronouns, verb as subject, or better known as gerunds, and finally argumentative expression, right? So let's see the first topic for today, which is relative clauses. But before that, for this week, according to the schedule, we have the photo. Is climate change a people's responsibility or company's responsibility? Okay, so according to the guía de aprendizaje, this evidence is the photo. So we have to do, okay, so we have to make an opinion taking into account this question. What are the causes of the climate change? What responsibility have the business? What responsibility have the people? What actions should be made to reduce the consequences of the climate change? And who should do these actions? All right. So work individually. Then after you make your own post, you have to ask or make a comment on one of your classmates' posts. Okay, in order to get the whole grade, right? So that is the photo. Is climate change a people responsibility or companies responsibility? Righty? Okay, so let's talk about our first topic today, which is relative clauses. Relative clauses is right here. There you go. Now let me stop my camera and then let's talk about relative clauses. Relative clauses are basically two simple tense, two simple sentences joined by a linking word. In this case, the linking words are the WH questions. WH questions are used to make question, obviously, and also to create compound sentences or long um, complement sentences. Okay. So in Spanish, we also use the WH question, qué, dónde, cuándo, cómo, in order to join two sentences. For example, in Spanish, we say, la ciudad a donde yo voy es muy bonita, right? We use donde to join two different sentences, okay? So relative clauses are clauses that provide additional information about a noun in a sentence. They are introduced by relative pronouns such as who, whom, whose, which, and that, or relative adverbs such as where, when, and why. Usually WH questions, right? So relative clauses have to add descriptive details or give more context to the noun they modify. Here is an overview of relative clauses. So there are two kinds of information. There are two kinds of extra information that we can put in a sentence. Important information or non-important information. Important information is called defining relative clauses, right? So these clauses provide essential information about the noun they modify. They define or identify the noun by specifying essential characteristics or qualities. So for example, the book that is on the table is mine. So we have two sentences in this case. We have the book is mine, and we have is on the table, right? So we use this, that in Spanish, que, right? In Spanish, that is the same as that is the same as que, right? So el libro que está en la mesa, the book that is on the table is mine, is mío. Okay. So we put in this important information, right? This is important information, important information, right? We add this information, which is important, right? About the noun. The noun is the subject, in this case, the book, right? So we put information or important information about this noun. And we join it with this word. The book that is on the table is mine. That's how you create relative clause. In this case, that is on the table, right? Which is important information, right? This is called defining relative clause. Important information. If we have non-important information, that is called non-defining. Okay. John, in this case, they clauses provide additional non-essential information about the noun they modified. They add extra details but can be omitted without affecting the core meaning of the sentence, right? In this case, we have two sentences, right? The book that is mine, I'm sorry, the book is mine. That was the sentence. The book is mine, right? But we don't know what book. This is why this information is important, right? We don't know what book is that person talking about. So if we say is on the table, right? The book that is on the table, if we add that whole information, then we specify, and then we know which book that person is talking about. Okay. Now, non-important information, like, for example, we have these two sentences right here. John plays the piano, and then we have who is an excellent musician. This is non-important information, right? Because if you say John plays the piano, then you are assuming that the person knows who is John. But you don't have to say, you don't have to give additional information in order for the person to know who you are talking about, right? In this case, this person, John, is known, right? John, in this case, John is known by the person hearing or reading, right? So this information is not important, right? Not important at all. This is just extra information because we already know who John is. Yeah, we already know that John plays the piano. So we assume that if he plays the piano, he's a musician. He's a good musician, right? So in this sentence, the relative clause, who is an excellent musician, provides additional information about John, but can be removed without changing the main idea. Okay. So if the person that is if the person that is hearing or reading you, right? If the person that is hearing or reading you doesn't know, they don't know who John is, they have no idea who John is. Who is John? They have no idea who is John. Then this information is important, right? Because you have to specify who is John. But if they know who John is, then that information is not important. Okay? In addition to relative pronouns, relative adverbs can also introduce relative clauses. In this case, we have I still remember the day when we first met, right? So in this case, this is important information. Well, why? Because if we omit this information, the sentence doesn't make sense. If you only say, I still remember the day, right? Then the person will say, what day, right? So that information that you omitted before, this information is important, right? I still remember the day when we first met. Ah, okay, I get it, right? Then you can understand who is that or what is the day that that person is talking about. So in this sentence, the relative adverb when introduce the relative clause when we first met, right? So that information is important. Okay. Well, that is another. The rest nominal and adverbial clauses, that's a complete different thing. In this case, we have relative clause. Right? Again, relative clauses are subordinate clauses that provide extra information about a noun or pronoun, right? In a grammar structure, subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement, the nouns are usually the subject, right? Nouns or pronouns, right, are usually subject, but they can also be the complement when the complement is an object, right? So for example, I um, hit the ball, right? So we have a subject, right? We have a subject right here, and then we have an object right here. So nouns can be subject and complement, right? So in this case, what a relative clauses does is that they modify or describe a noun, adding essential or non-essential information. So important information or essential information defining, or non-important or non-essential, non-defining information, right? Again, defining information or important information. So if you say only this, the book was fascinating, right? The person that is hearing you will say, what book are you talking about? Right? What book are you talking about? If you only say the book was fascinating, I mean, what book? Right? What book are you talking about? That is why this information right here is important because you are specifying, right? You are being specific about the subject. In this case, the subject is the book, right? So in that case, the clause that I borrow specify which book is being referred to. So this information is in, let me write it down, is important, right? Non-defining on non-important information, right? Um, for example, you say, hey, my brother is coming to visit, right? The person oh, cool, your brother, right? Why? He knows your brother, right? So this information is not important. Who lives in New York is not important. We don't care if he lives in New York. We already know who he is, right? We already know he knows he knows already your brother. So this information is not important in this case. Okay? It's non-defining. So my brother who lives in New York is coming to visit. Yeah, okay. I don't care if he lives in New York. That is not important to me. So you can only say this, and that makes sense. My brother is coming to visit. Okay, your brother. I know your brother. Yeah? So that is the difference between important information and non-important information. In English, defining or non-defining information. Okay? So those are relative clauses. Again, relative clauses are used to modify, describe, or give more information about the subject, noun, or pronouns, which are subject or object. Okay? So that is our first topic, which is relative clauses. Then we have the pronouns. Let's see the pronoun. Okay. I'm sorry. There are two kinds of pronouns. We have subject pronouns and object pronouns. So subject pronouns are the regular pronouns that we already know. Again, subject pronouns are right here, right? Let's put it right here. Oh, sorry. So subject are regular or subject pronouns, regular or subject pronoun, right? And object or objeto, sorry, objeto are, so- are object. Okay? So subject pronouns, the ones that we already know, the regular pronouns, yo, I, usted, you, he, ella, she, object or animals without gender, right? And in singular, right? We, nosotros, nosotras, they, ellos, ella, right? So those are the subject pronouns. So for example, I like to read books. I is the subject pronoun. She is going to the park. She is the subject pronoun.
we are studying for the exam, we is the subject pronoun. Okay, so regular pronouns are called subject pronouns. Object pronouns, in the other hand, are the ones right here at the end, objeto, right? So object pronouns are used when the noun or the pronoun makes an action and we have to specify who is receiving the action. Okay. So me in Spanish, me, you in Spanish, te, le o lees, him in Spanish, lo o le, her in Spanish, la o le, it for object or animals, us in Spanish, nos, them in Spanish, los, las, le. We'll see the more example right here. So John gave me, right? Object pronoun, gave me a gift. This me is the same as this me in Spanish, right? Objetos pronombre is the same in Spanish. So John gave me a gift. John me dio un regalo. Gave me dio. Okay. Can you help him with his homework? This is the object pronoun in this sentence. Can you help him with his homework? So what is this him in Spanish? This him in Spanish is lo, right? We saw it right here. Him, lo, or le, right? So him is the same as this lo in Spanish. So help him, ayudarlo o ayudarle a él o ayudarle, ¿cierto? So me, him, lo. She, let's use she saw us, saw us, she saw us at the party yesterday. What is this us? Object pronoun is nos in Spanish, right? She saw us at the party yesterday. Nos vio. Saw us, nos vio. Okay, let's see more example of that. So, for example, we have object pronouns. So, she gave me a book. In Spanish, right? So, she gave me a book, right? So, what happened if we change me, por te? Ella te dio un libro. So, in English, she gave you a book, right? If we say ella le dio a él, right? A guy, a man, right? Ella le dio un libro. Okay, she gave him a book. What is this? She gave him a book. Ella le dio un libro. If we say ella le dio un libro, but in this case, ella, right? Then she gave her a book. She gave her a book. Ella le dio un libro. In this case, a ella. If we want to say ella nos dio un libro, right? Then she gave us a book. She gave us book. And if we want to say ella lee un libro, in this case, ellos o ella, right? Ella lee un libro, in this case, she gave the, uh, okay? So that is object pronoun, and that is the equivalence in Spanish. Let's see another example. She called him yesterday. So in Spanish, so in Spanish, right? Le, in this case, a guy, right? A man, él, ella le, so we call him. If we say ella, right? Ella le llamó ayer a ella, in this case, her, right? We say ella me llamó ayer, ella me llamó, before me yesterday. Ella te llamó, right? Te llamó, ella te llamó, then he called you yesterday. Ella nos llamó, she called us yesterday. And finally, ella les llamó, in this case, ellos o ellas, right? Ellos o ellos. So, ella les llamó, call them. She called them yesterday. Ella les llamó ayer. All right? So that's depending on who is receiving this action. Okay? So whoever is receiving this action, then we change the object pronouns. So for me, for I, me, right? For you, for he, him, for she, her, for animals or object, it, right? For us, or for we, us, I'm sorry, for we, us, and finally for they, them. Okay? So those are the subject and the object pronouns. Then we have verb as subject. So verb as subject, it is better called a gerunds, gerundios in Spanish, right? So gerundios are using the verb, right? Plus ing. Okay? This is not the same as progressive tenses. Not, right? Not the same. That is a huge difference between you want, right? And the progressive tenses, right? Progressive tenses also use the verb plus ing, but it's not the same thing, okay? So gerunds are usually verbs that act as a noun. Let's remember that in a sentence we have the subject, right? We have the auxiliary, right? We have the verb, and then we have the complement or the object or object. So nouns in this case are the subject, right? We are putting verbs, right? Verbs as subject, right? So for example, reading is fun. Reading is fun is basically this in Spanish. So in Spanish, we are also using a verb. Let's put another color for verb. Let's put blue for verbs. Okay. So we are using verbs as subject, right? In both English and Spanish, right? Reading is fun. leer I'm sorry, leer es divertir, right? Reading is fun, leer is divertir. Swimming is healthy. Swimming is healthy. So in Spanish, this swimming is healthy means nadar es saludable, right? So we are also using a verb as a subject, right? We are using the verb as a subject. So these verbs will become the subject, all right? So more examples. Verbs are only used with singular subject, I'm sorry. So you are also always saying running is good, but you cannot say running are good, right? This is this is wrong. You can only use is with the G ones, all right? You are always is with the G ones, not are, okay? More examples, swimming is fun, reading is important. So we are using, again, we are using verbs as subject, right? Subject, subject, and as subject, right? So swimming, nadar, reading, leer. We are using it as subject. Yeah, so studying when is a gerund is estudiar. Working in Spanish, trabajar. Okay, so this is when they are gerunds. Okay, gerunds, remember, verb plus ing. But if we are talking about a progressive sentence, right, which also use verb plus ing, so this is different. Okay, so for example, if we say study, when we are doing a progressive sentence, studying means estudiando, right? Working, when we are doing a progressive sentence, this means trabajando. Okay? So that is why progressive sentence and gerunds might be very similar because they use verb plus ing, right? Both use the verb plus ing. In Spanish, they are completely different things, okay? In English, they are also different, completely different things, right? They are not the same. So which is why in this case, we are using the you ones as subject. But if you are making a progressive sentence, this is a verb. That is something that you have to keep in mind, okay? So more and one last example, watching movies improve listening. Ver películas mejora comprensión. So watching is not the same as viendo. Okay? No. If you see watching in the beginning, then it's an infinitive in Spanish. Okay? So you want in English, right? In Spanish is an infinitive. Okay? So which is why watching, which is a you want, it will become an infinitivo, watching, ver. Okay, but if this is a progressive sentence, then watching will be viendo, but it's not that. Okay, it is a you want. Let's see a little bit of more examples. So as the subject, again, reading helps improve vocabulary, that is, leer ayuda a mejorar vocabulary. Okay, so we are using leer, which is a verb, right? This is a verb, leer. We are using it as a subject. We are using gerunds, I'm sorry, gerundios or gerunds, okay? Jogging every morning keeps me healthy. So jogging is trotar cada mañana me mantiene saludable. Cooking takes patience. Cooking takes patience means cocinar toma paciencia. Ah, so there are verbs as subject. Okay, verbs as. Finally, for this class, we have linking words, right? In the formative component argumentative expression. So some I call them linking words, basically. So we have a few linking words. There are many more than this. There are many, many more, but these are the most common. Okay. So the most common addition linking word is the word and in Spanish, y, right? For example, we say playing and playing, playing and playing and working. Uh, right? We are adding, right? We are adding information. Adding in- information. There are more formal ways to say this and, for example, additionally, right? Additionally, we can also consider other factors. Additionally, in Spanish, adicionalmente. Furthermore, además, in Spanish. Furthermore, the results were consistent across all tests. Moreover, además de eso, o para agregar, ¿cierto? En Spanish, is moreover is worth noting that the study had a large sample size. In addition, in Spanish, in addition to the main course, we offer a variety of desserts. Okay, so and I'm sorry, addition, that are linking words to add more information. Contrast, so the most common contrast linking word is the word but in Spanish, pero, right? This is the most common contrast linking word, right? What is this used to compare, obviously, or contrast, right? For example, there are more words, more linking words to contrast. For example, however, sin embargo, Spanish. The weather was beautiful. However, we decided to stay indoors. On the other hand, on the other hand, in Spanish, por otro lado, right? Literalmente en la otra mano. But in Spanish we say por otro lado. She enjoys hiking, o por el contrario, más bien. She enjoys hiking. On the other hand, he prefers swimming. Right? In contrast, in Spanish, en contraste. In contrast to what you believe, I think it's a good idea. Nevertheless is in Spanish, sin embargo, that's basically a synonym of sin embargo. The movie was long, nevertheless, we stay until the end. But basically, sin embargo, but that's like the most close comparison in Spanish. Cause and effect. Cause and effect, the most common linking word is because, which means porque in Spanish, right? This is the most common cause and effect linking word, but there are more. For example, therefore, por lo tanto, therefore, por lo tanto. She studies diligently, therefore she aced the exam. Ace equal pass exam. Okay? Ace the exam. As a result, como resultado in Spanish, the team worked hard. As a result, they won the championship. Como resultado. Because of this, por esta razón, o por esto, right? Because of this, we had to cancel the event because of this unexpected weather. I'm sorry, weather. We had to cancel the event because of this unexpected weather. To comparison, let's say that the most common comparison linking word is or, which means oh, okay, or to compare. Uh, similarmente. Similarly, both cities have vibrant cultural scenes. Likewise, de la misma manera. Likewise, de la misma manera. He enjoys playing tennis. Likewise, she's a fan of the sport. In the same way, de la misma manera o por el mismo lado. In the same way, we need to prioritize safety in our workplace. In the same way, we need to prioritize safety in our workplace. Likewise can also be used, for example, when someone says to you, have a good day, you can say likewise, right? Likewise is the same as you too, right? Likewise, you too. Right? Time and sequence. So we don't have a very common time and sequence linking word, but we have some very common, which is firstly, primero, right? Literalmente sería primeramente. But we don't say that. We say primero, right? Firstly, primero. Secondly, segundo. Thirdly, tercero. Right? Literalmente sería primeramente, segundamente, terceramente, pero pues no decimos así, right? We say first. We say primero. First, gather all the materials. Second, assemble the parts. Meanwhile, mientras tanto, he was cooking dinner. Meanwhile, he was setting the table, right? Subsequently, subsecuentemente. The experiment yielded positive results. Subsequently, we expanded our research. Illustration and example. For instance, por ejemplo, ¿vale? Como is the closest comparison in Spanish. Por ejemplo, many animals are in danger. For instance, pandas and tigers, I'm sorry, pandas and tigers. To illustrate, para ilustrar in Spanish. So to illustrate the point, let's consider a real life example. In other words, en otras palabras, the meeting was postponed. In other words, is rescheduled. Okay, the meeting was postponed. In other words, is rescheduled. More, to conclude or summarize. Conclusion and summary. What is a summary or conclusion? Well, resumir. right? Or right. So in conclusion, I believe that education is the key to progress. To sum up, para resumir, básicamente es lo que significa. To sum up, the main points are as follows. In summary también significa para resumir o en resumidas cuentas, o para concluir o para acabar. In summary, the report highlights key findings, contradiction, and opposition. Although it rained, the event was still a success. You can say also simply though it rained, the event was still a success. And it's pretty much the same thing. Okay, the same thing. However, sin embargo, she wanted to go out. However, she had too much work. On the contrary, por el contrario, many believe it would fail. On the contrary, it thrived. Thrive is equal to success. Right? Condition if C, okay, is not the same as yes. Okay, yes, C to answer answer affirmatively. That's how you write it. I forgot how to write this. Affirmatively, affirmatively, affirmative. Okay. To answer affirmatively or to answer in a positive way, right? Meanwhile, if also means see, right? See, but in this case is condition, right? In Spanish, for example, see, okay? So it's a condition. If this happens, I don't do this, okay? So if means see, but that is the difference, okay? One thing is to say yes, and one thing is to say if. Now, if you finish your homework, you can go play. So if this happens, right? If this condition happens, then you can go and play. Okay? Unless, a menos que in Spanish, unless you study regularly, you won't pass the exam, provided that, siempre y cuando, provided that, siempre y cuando. That will be the closest Spanish um, comparison or equivalence. You can attend the party provided that you arrive on time. And finally, purpose, so that, which means, so that you mean, por eso, so that, por eso, in this case, she studied hard so that she could get into her dream school. You don't have to say the whole thing. You can say only this. She studied hard so she could get into her dream school. I think this is more common. Okay. In order to, para. Means this is basically what it means in Spanish. In order to, para. He save money in order to buy a new car. Again, you don't have to say the whole thing. You can say this. You can say he saved money to buy a new car. This is more common, but informal. If you want to be formal, if you want to be educated, then you have to say in order to. For the purpose of, para el propósito de, okay? So we conducted the experiment for the purpose of gathering data. We conducted the experiment for the purpose of gathering. Okay, so those are the most linking words. Okay, those are the most common. There are many more. Okay, so today we finish our first formative component, which is if I had tried this before, I wouldn't have produced it in mass. All right. Next week, we are going to see our second formative component, which is, oh, wow, you agreed on a point. Increíble, se pusieron de acuerdo en algo. Okay. So next class, we have that formative component, and that is our last station for this class. Okay. So next Wednesday is our last class. All right. So please keep that in mind. I don't think that I have anything else to say to you more than I hope that you have a nice weekend. Remember that the last day to receive homework is April the 10th, right? April 10th. That is the last day to send your homework. Okay. Um, I think that's pretty much everything for today. Tomorrow we have atención sincrónica at 12 p.m., at midday, at noon, al mediodía. We have our chat from 12 to 1. Okay. And that's pretty much it. Okay. Let's see. I'll see you next week, Wednesday at 5 p.m.